Learning a new language can be one of the most frustrating things, but at the same time, oh so rewarding. Personally, I live for the weird little quirks that each language has to offer, because to me, that's just what makes the language unique. My name's Yama, and today, I want to share some of these intricacies that I've stumbled into while learning the French language. And hopefully, this will give you a better insight about how it feels to learn français. C'est parti.
Why on earth would you ever want to learn French? The accent sounds arrogant, and isn't there like 4 million different silent vowels? I'm going to go learn a useful language like Uzbek instead.
Now just hold on to your baguette for 1 second. Although true to a certain extent, French can be one of the most useful languages to learn because there are over 320 million speakers worldwide, most of which spawn from this one glob of land called Africa. And on top of the large amount of NPCs available worldwide, there's also just a lot of French vocabulary sprinkled into the other languages around the world. Another thing is that French is a Romance language, which means that it's not that difficult to learn compared to some of the Asian or Slavic languages. But honestly, the most giga-chad reason to learn French is just to simply refuse to speak it as opposed to not being able to. One of the inevitable things that comes with learning a new language is making mistakes. And if you're ever concerned with whether or not you made a mistake in French, don't worry, because the French people will let you know.
Est-ce que vous voulez répondre?
Moi.
Non. Ok.
Est-ce que vous voulez répondre?
Moi?
Et non pas est-ce que vous voulez répondre? Est-ce que vous voulez répondre?
Native French speakers do not tolerate people, especially foreigners, butchering their language. Like, I get that I'm a stupid foreigner who's probably at fault when I mispronounce the word inébranlablement, but it's definitely not that serious. Like, come on, man. No matter how good your French is, absolute beginner or near fluent, French people do not tolerate people misusing their language. If you so much as even dare misgender a coat as a woman, they will stop you in your tracks and say in their goofy sounding accent, "Excusez-moi, ce n'est pas la bonne conjugation." Shut the fuck. My brother in Kaufman, it was your decision to make Monto have a feminine ending. Honestly, man, French people are just the world's biggest haters. I've met people who have seasoned this language, others who grew up speaking the language, and I still see them getting heckled to this day for making small minor mistakes. You just can't win. Here's a tip though. If you ever want to feel better about your inadequate ability to speak French, just ask any French person to pronounce a word that starts with the letter H in English, and watch them piss their pantalon.
Hedgehog.
Hedgehog? Hedgehog.
Hedgehog.
Hengeho. C'est une ville ça, je pensais. Ouais.
Rule number 1 of speaking the French language. Never pronounce the endings of words. Whenever you see a new word, just remove the last few letters, slap on a little accent or something, make it sound Frenchy, and boom, you probably just sound like someone straight out of Paris.
De vrai.
Let's practice together out loud, okay? How do you think you pronounce this word? There you go, you guessed it, it's pronounced aller. Now, how do you think you pronounce this one? Oh my god, you got it right again, it's aller. Now pronounce this one. C'est-tu vous en franco, quoi? Now using that same word, can you tell me how do you think you pronounce this sentence? You know how 5 seconds ago I said that rule number 1 of French is that you never pronounce the endings of words? Well, rule number 2 is that there will always be exceptions to the rule. Liaison is one of those unique quirks that the French language has, which absolutely changes how you pronounce words. Whenever a word starts with the letter H or a vowel, you have to pronounce it with the ending of the word that came before it. That's why you don't read this phrase as ils ont allé ici. You read it as ils ont allé ici. See the little difference? You have to pronounce the ending of the word aller. This rule is honestly not that hard to remember, but it's just one of those things that adds to the complexity about learning French. But for me, probably the hardest part about French is just replicating the French accent.
I don't understand because my English is very bad, but okay.
Okay, I'm sorry.
There are a few reasons why the French accent is so hard to replicate. Stuff like the abundance of nasal sound, sin, son, sin, or the previously mentioned silent letters. But to me, and a lot of other French learners, it's the R sound. Here, I'm going to share how I learned it actually. Funnily enough, right, I'm from Canada, and there's a lot of French speakers here, but the way that I learned how to pronounce the letter R was taught to me by an exchange student from Germany. Basically, she recommended that I think of it as a HR sound rather than just an R sound. So it kind of just like segues together. I don't know how to explain it, but instead of just it's HR. Okay, this probably sounds absolutely ridiculous, but yeah, just try that out.
Get your money up, not your funny up.
Apart from pronunciation and all those goofy rules, French also has a bunch of grammar rules that make me want to end my Duolingo streak. How on earth are beginners supposed to know that a water bottle is a woman and a telephone is a man? Gender is something that the English language doesn't have. We just use the for everything, you know, the lamp, the computer. Having genders honestly just adds to the level of complexity that the French language has. I can guarantee that as a beginner, you'll find yourself in a situation where you see a new word and you basically have to flip a coin to see if it's male or female. Like, is poutine masculine or feminine? I mean, it doesn't end in a vowel, so it's probably masculine, right? Wrong. You may be familiar with this word. It's pronounced nous. Basically, it just means we. If you've ever learned French before, you've probably seen it, and you may even know the dumb conjugations that come with it. Well, I've got some bad news for you. French people never use it. And if you do use it, you are what the French people call un gros bâtard.
Right to jail, right away.
Okay, that was a little bit of an exaggeration. I mean, you're still a bâtard, but French do use it, just not in the way that you would think. When trying to say the word we, as in we are going to Tiananmen Square on June 4th, 1989, French people actually use the word on, which basically means the same thing. It's just slightly less formal and it's easier to conjugate. The word nous, the one we just talked about, is rarely used. Really only used in those formal situations where you're writing an essay or when the speaker is trying to be very polite. I've already talked about how hard it is to pronounce those French words, but I haven't talked being on the receiving end of that, trying to understand French speech.
Comme les Français qui tombent sur cette chaîne trouvent que je parle trop lentement et qu'ils sont toujours obligés d'accélérer mes vidéos pour pas s'ennuyer, et bah dans cette vidéo, je vais vous apprendre à parler plus vite, comme les Français.
And if I've learned anything about trying to understand French people, is that they love to mush words together. I don't know in French transforms into je ne sais pas. Je ne sais pas. But since French people are lazy, they like to shorten it and it transforms into je sais pas. Which, I mean, it kind of makes sense, but then you start getting to the next level where they say je sais pas, which is already pretty crazy. But if you thought it couldn't get any worse, let me introduce you to Spa. The French language really is amazing, isn't it? On top of that, once you start talking about different regional accents, it starts to open another whole can of worms. Specifically, the Quebecois accent is borderline incomprehensible, and I swear they're not even speaking French half the time, they're just using these sound effects.
Mais je te comprends parce que moi j'ai déjà eu les cheveux courts, là, puis on m'appelait petit gars là, à l'épicerie, puis j'étais en tabarnak, puis je les ai laissés pousser.
Putain.
As a Canadian myself, I get to interact with these Quebecers on a daily basis, and I gotta say, they have some pretty unique slang. One of these sentences is Esti de colis de tabarnak, which roughly translates in English to how are you doing? It's kind of slang, but make sure to use this greeting if you ever meet a Quebecer. And speaking of region-specific slang, France French has this thing called verlan. Verlan is basically inversing words to make them sound super hip and cool, you know? And at the same time confuse older folks. Words like cimer, meuf, and pécho are some of the most common ones you'll hear. Alright, I guess in conclusion, learning French, like any other language, is a journey. Honestly, despite all the hiccups that comes with learning this language, finally being able to have a solid, clean conversation with a native speaker has got to be one of the most rewarding things I've ever experienced. That is until they lean over to you and say, "Excusez-moi, c'est pas la bonne prononciation." You know what, man? I'm done with this language. Tabarnak.